Zenvstyle.com.
Zenvstyle.com. Zenvstyle.com. Zenvstyle.com.
Man, we need to tear what we know as U.S. history up. Just go ahead and just tear it up, right? It's not about this notion of reform, it's about transformation.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Black Agenda Podcast, and we have another distinguished guest on the show today. His name is Dr. LaGarrett King, and he's the associate professor at the University of Missouri, and he's an associate professor of social studies education in particular. And so he received his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin after an 8-year teaching career in Georgia and Texas, and his primary research interest examines how Black history is interpreted and taught in schools and society. And he also researches critical theories of race, teacher education, and curriculum history. And so with this in mind, this conversation is really perfect, to wrap up our Black History Month, but also perfect, to have someone like Dr. King on the show. And so, Dr. King, we want to thank you for being on the show with us.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen.
Thank you. So let's get right into it. And so our first question is about, the kind of the perception of African-American history. So when people learn about us, they mostly learn about the struggle and the hardships that our people went through. You hear a lot about slavery and Jim Crow and negative stereotypes. And it just seems like the value that African-Americans bring to society is constantly really being buried by this narrative that we're lazy or incompetent, trying to be victims all the time. And so because of how that history is taught, how do you think that's affected the way other racial groups in the country perceive African Americans and treat us with that history in mind?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So three things. So one, the history curriculum does present Black people as problems to democracy and not necessarily solutions to democracy. And when we really get into the historical narratives, the true historical narratives or the more complete historical narratives, we could, argue and say that Black people have been solutions to kind of this imagined notions of democracy, right? So I think it's very important for us to understand that history is about identity, right? It's the first time that we learn about ourselves, right, through history. And it's also the first time we learn about the other through history, right? So there's implications. So probably the first time that most school children learn about Black people historically is either right? And typically we enter the US history narrative through enslavement, or if we're teaching some form of world history, there's some type of subjugation, right, aspect to it, right? So in the minds of the average citizens, right, we are forever slaves, right? And 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 by that, I'm not necessarily, talking about this notion of being owned, right? I'm 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 talking about this notion of slave in the humanizing sense, right? Like slave is being dehumanized. And one of the reasons why slavery was very prominent is this notion of humanizing Africans to be more like white folk, right? Or more like Europeans, right? So we are constantly in that state of slavery, right? Dispossessed of agency, always surveilled, and always this notion of we have to teach you how to be more human. And part of that ideology, right, comes from the history curriculum in which, these particular people learn, right, our citizens learn, right? So there's this implication, right? So if you're a slave during this particular moment, you were owned, right? You were dehumanized, right? And as well, when we're talking about US context, right? You had nothing to do with this democracy. So if you notice, like throughout history, whenever Black folk are fighting for our human rights, there's always this visceral response for a good majority of white folk, right? Because in their mind, based on the history, they gave us our freedom, right? Historians in the early 20th century said, hey, look, Black people around this world are the only people that didn't fight and win their freedom. That's what they believed, right? So therefore, when we look at US context, okay, well, Black people are fighting, oh, what are they fighting for? Oh, gosh, they need to be, because they truly believe that they gave us freedom. And therefore, whenever you give somebody something, right, there's always this notion of you need to be happy with what you're given, right? So I'll give this example. If you're in a car, right, and you see a homeless person, and the homeless person comes up and asks for money, right, and you give that homeless person $1, right, and that homeless person gets upset because you gave them $1, right? So then you in the car, you're going to be mad because you're thinking, I just gave you $1, not thinking I can't do anything with $1. I can barely get anything to drink. I can barely get anything to eat. And you may be the first person I ever gave that person, but you're upset because you gave them something and you feel that they should be appreciative of what they gave you. And that same kind of aspect we can kind of look at for citizens who believe through our history that we're just simply slaves and we're giving you something and you should be happy with whatever you got based on that historical narratives.
That's a very great perspective because I think that's what Devin and I, we both grew up in Mississippi, and I definitely feel like that was the narrative that I heard from a lot of people, to where you should be able to get a job and do your own thing, and you got essentially you got that freedom that we gave you, so you don't need to be asking us for anything further. So that's really, I really like that perspective you're bringing in here. One of the things we wanted to talk about, is obviously education, because Devin and I, we really believe that education is the key, is the medicine to all these symptoms that our community is going through. But whenever you look at education, and you look at K through 12, and even on the collegiate level, there's an absence of education about us. There's not much, unless it's maybe an elective and it's not required. So whenever we talk about actually trying to integrate maybe a curriculum that's different, our question to you is that, do you feel that maybe falls more on the shoulders of teachers and school administrators who decide that curriculum and trying to teach children about Black history? Or do you think that it may fall more on, maybe African-American parents of, African-American children to maybe actually teach that history?
Right. So I think the responsibility is both, right? I think when we look historically, and something that we're doing through the Carter Center is that we're asking people, like every time I start off my professional development, I ask people, when did you fall in love with Black history, right? And typically those answers come from outside of school, right? So historically, there's always been like Black community that have taught us our history, right? Whether it's through the church, whether it's through our families, whether it's, through other kind of aspects, Jack and Jill, and all these particular Black centric, community groups, right? So historically, right, Black folk have always kind of taught against what the school system has taught, right? But for the school system, yes, it is their responsibility, right, to teach notions of Black history and other racialized histories as well, because history, again, is about identity. History is about humanity, and history can be about citizenship as well. So everyone needs to understand these particular histories, right, that make up our history, right? The problem, however, right, is that we have been in this kind of unofficial educational policy of historical uniformity and historical integration, right? Mm-hmm. So by historical uniformity, what I mean is that school administrators and the powers believe that all histories are the same, no matter what racialized group you are in, gendered group, or whatever the case may be. They want to present a history that's uniformed, right? Mm-hmm. They believe that Black folk believed in the same thing as white folk, and that we saw that history the same, right? Typically is essentially white history in blackface, right? All right, so we're going to teach about the American Revolution. We're going to say Black people fought in the Revolution, both for the British and both for the colonists, and we're going to call them Black loyalists, and we're going to call them Black patriots. When you really think about teaching Black history through Black perspectives, right? Those particular people should not be considered Black loyalists, because they could give a darn about the British, right? They definitely should not have been called Black patriots. They could give a darn about the American colonists, right? Both sides promised them freedom, and that's what they were fighting for, their freedom, not necessarily freedom for those particular countries, right? Second, with historical integration, while they believe that integrating narratives, Black narratives and other narratives, are important to the totality of the history curriculum, what they don't do is they change the quantitative aspects of it, but they don't change the qualitative aspects of it. So while we're infusing faces and infusing events, those events and those faces, in terms of the narrative, does not change, right? So for example, Brown versus Board of Education. If you teach Brown versus Board of Education through Black people, right, through Black people's perspectives, that history changes the ways in which we understand and teach that particular subject in our schools, right? So what I try to have teachers understand is that instead of trying to focus on this notion of historical uniformity or historical integration, we need to teach history that is contentious, right? A historical contentiousness that understands that what is historically important for white people is not historically important for Black people, right? So, and when we look at those particular perspectives, I think those histories, I know those histories would change, and people would have a greater understanding, right, of Black history and Black people in general, right? When I do professional developments, a lot of people just want prepackaged curriculum. And I say, well, it really doesn't matter about the curriculum right now in your school system, because everyone has been miseducated, right? So therefore, you can have a lovely history curriculum, but if you don't do identity work, and if you don't do changing your mindset, right, then that good curriculum is null and void, because you're still coming from kind of those miseducated notions of what you learned in school and what you learned in teacher ed and what you learned, through your and through our society, that you're not even going to teach it properly, right?
Right. And I think that's so interesting hearing your perspective on that, and how the African-American perspective is not really written about in the history books. It's written from, like you say, like a point of view that everybody kind of believed the same thing as far as the Revolutionary War and all of that. And so it's so interesting to hear that. And some of it we think too comes from the fact that, there's not a lot of, there could be better diversity amongst teachers. There could be, definitely we need more Black educators, Black male educators especially. And so maybe that would help with how that history is taught. And so we want to get into that after the break. So that's going to do it for our first segment. But when we come back, we do want to ask about, when you speak to these teachers in districts, what's the reaction to some of the things you're saying, and then also get into your advice to parents in the community who can kind of help to influence the textbooks and curriculum that the kids are being taught with. And so we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, listeners. So we want to get into, kind of what Dr. King does, when he goes to districts and schools and speaks to these teachers and does workshops with them. And so, Dr. King, we know that you do speak to a lot of districts, and you kind of referenced it there. People kind of want a prepackaged curriculum. There's more of a quantitative viewpoint of we need more facts about Black history, but not so much a qualitative standpoint. People aren't really focusing on that. And so when you go to these teachers and districts and administrators and you do your workshops, what is the reaction when you say things like you need to refocus your efforts and really answer the question of what is Black history?
Yeah. So in terms of the teachers and the school personnel, typically is always positive, right? Because at the end of the day, what I'm saying is we need to be more human in our approach to history, right? And later on, hopefully, we'll talk about my principles and Black History framework. But when I present these frameworks and when I kind of do this identity work with them, it makes sense, right? Like there's no one can say, oh, you're making stuff up, or, oh, you're doing like, no, I'm just making you think a different way, right? For example, like I use this notion of why do we, when we teach Black history, why do we always focus on this notion of nonviolence as the only appropriate approach to freedom? The United States of America. This country was born off of violence. Every war that we have and do is always based on this notion of freedom. So why do we focus on this notion of nonviolence when it comes to Black folk and other folk, racialized people? Like, so don't come here teaching us that nonviolence is the only appropriate response to obtain our civil rights when white folk have been violent to achieve these civil rights forever. So now, again, I say, hey, I'm not advocating that you advocate for violence, right, for your classes, but I'm saying you're doing your students a disservice when you simply focus on this notion of nonviolence when throughout their whole history curriculum, you've talked about violence, right? So it's this kind of reconceptualizing, right? What is history, reconceptualizing who is human, right? And then kind of connecting to Black history. Now, a lot of these school districts are concerned with the community, right? The community responses to what we're doing, right? But then again, it comes back to this notion of you don't even know what you're arguing, right? Because, I say it's not necessarily what's concerning to a lot of different people is Black history per se. It's the kind of Black history that we're talking about, right? There's this lovely, Saturday Night Live skit with Jay Farrell, Kenan Thompson, and I forgot the sister's name, but they do this nice little Black history, a song in class, and they start off Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, everybody's like, so if it's that Black history where we, present these, center, notions of, the safe Rosa Parks, the safe King, the safe, Harriet Tubman, everybody's fine with that because they're like, yes, this is what we want to learn. But when we really get serious, right, and delve into the Black history that really examines, so a lot of times people ask, why is Black history so hard, right? And teachers would say, well, because, we're talking about slavery, we're talking about racism, we're talking about all this stuff, and it makes me feel uncomfortable or whatever. I said, no, Black history is difficult for you to teach because you have to re-examine who you are as a person. You have to re-examine your whole identity. Because when you teach Black history through Black perspectives, you're not historically important. And for too long, what the history has taught us was that you, white folk, white men in particular, are the most important historical person in our world. So when you teach Black history through Black perspectives, right? Now you realize I'm not that important. So you have to rethink your whole being. That's why it's hard to teach, because while you're trying to teach Black history, you're trying to infuse yourself in Black history. Right? Because our education says white people are so important in history. Even when we talk about other people, white people are always there. The nice white person, the white person, and you can't conceive a history curriculum, right, without you being the center of attention, right? So when I lay that down for them, everybody's like, I can't really, he's right. The type of history that I do teach is, I do teach nonviolence as the only, because I've been in history classes all over this country. I have not yet been in one history class where someone said, do you think the American colonists should have marched on King George? Do you think the American colonists shouldn't have thrown that tea over into the harbor? Because they really should have did no, the American, no. But during the civil rights movement, that's all you hear.
Yeah.
That is all. They shouldn't have did this. They shouldn't have tore these cities. They should know. Nonviolent, Martin Luther King and all those people that believe that. And I simply ask them, why do you do it? And they have no answer to it. Because we have been miseducated for so long. So you get some pushback, but after I lay it out for them, they're like, oh yeah, I don't know. You're right. And the only argument you can come is that it's, it's not patriotic. History's not supposed to be patriotic. and then let's ask the question, who defines patriotism? And then I ask them, I say, look, who's the person in your life that's the most critical of your life? And typically they'll say some type of loved one. And why is that? Because they love me. They want me to do well. They want me to do, okay. So isn't patriotism critiquing the US's mission statement? That's all the Declaration and Constitution is a mission statement. So if we're critiquing it, what we're trying to do is get to what you said you want to be. It's the same thing with your father or your mother. Hey, you said you want to be a doctor. Well, let's take these science classes. You know what I'm saying? You have to take this biology, and you may be mad as all get out, but that makes sense. They're like, you know what? I did say I want to be a doctor. I did say I want to be an engineer. I probably need to take these science classes, these chemistry classes, so I can become. You know what I'm saying? So that's all Black history and Black people are saying. If you're saying you are the egalitarian country, if you're saying that you believe in democracy, if you're saying you believe in equity, these are the things we need to learn. If not, then all you're doing is preaching authoritarian patriotism and not democratic patriotism, right? So it's not emotional. It's about thinking and just laying things out to them. And it's been positive, somewhat positive, throughout. So,
I like everything you said. I mean, it's because I think that, whenever you're trying to showcase Black history, it is easy to, almost try to, infuse yourself into it as if you're someone who's white. Because I mean, that's kind of what you've always been taught to do. Figure out how to, be engaging in different things of that nature. But whenever we talk about being an ally to a cause, one of the biggest, pieces of advice that we've heard is to just show up and shut up. That's essentially what you should do, is just show up and shut up and kind of listen and understand your role. And I guess one thing that we want to make sure to ask, because a lot of people are probably listening and wondering what can they do to really help with this, and what can they do to kind of solve this whole issue of trying to teach all nonviolence and not teach the other part. And a lot of that comes down to the textbooks and the curriculum and things like that, where it seems like maybe they're set up in such a way that there's more fear of us pushed over all the other things that we're talking about here. So our question here is, your advice. What's your advice to maybe a parent or a community member who is really trying to bring changes to their textbooks, their curriculum, to make it actually more culturally diverse and aware of the true history that you're trying to teach to these school districts?
Well, I think one of the first things for parents is to be very involved and engage within those curriculum resources, right? Because we've seen throughout the news some problematic instructional practices, some problematic curriculum that came out around notions of Black history. So first, you need to educate yourself. So it's not just this notion of, hey, our history curriculum is Eurocentric, right? You need to actually know, okay, here are some examples of how it's Eurocentric and how it's harming, right, our students, right? I think two is to advocate for a more kind of humanistic, Black history. So, when I teach my framework, I don't necessarily go with in mind about content and standards, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think standards and content, they're so polarizing, right? Because people get all into the minutia of, well, we need to teach this, we need to teach that, we need to teach this, and it becomes overwhelming. There's no way that students can, keep all that knowledge, within a K-12 aspect. So when we think of Black history, you need to kind of promote these 6 values, but I'll add 2 more values that I'm developing. But the first principle is can't teach Black history without teaching about power, oppression, and racism, particularly this notion of systemic racism, because those particular instances have had a dramatic effect on Black lives, right? From where we stay, from our health, from our education, from all these social aspects that we experience. Principle 2 is that we have to teach about agency, perseverance, and resistance, right? If we only teach about power, oppression, and racism, what we've done, as we mentioned earlier, is kind of teach this kind of victim narrative. And to be clear, Black people have never been simply victims. We have been victimized, right? But we've never been simply victims. And we've always fought against, right, notions of power, oppression, and racism, right? Principle 3 is that not only do we need to focus on Black US folk, we need to focus on Africa, the African diaspora, and the various different migrations, right, that has happened with Black people throughout time. So that means let's not start with slavery, right? We need to start with ancient Africa. I believe Dr. Greg Carr said one time that the Black history was 24 hours, slavery is 1 second out of that 24 hours. So there's thousands and thousands of notions of history that we're missing, right? And when we start with European colonization or European contact as Black history, what we're saying is we didn't have a history before, right? Principle 4 is this notion of teaching about Black joy and Black love. Sometimes Black history is defined through oppression, right? Oppression and then liberation, right? Sometimes Black people are just people, right? And we found joy in situations that may not have been, such powerful, promise, right? We always find joy. We always love each other, right? Throughout these histories. Principle 5 is this notion of Black identities. We have to be very careful by not just teaching Black history through Black males who are Christian, who are heterosexual, who are middle class. We need to teach the gambit of Blackness, right? And that includes all different types of identities. Principle 6 is probably the most controversial, right? Principle 6 is Black historical contention. So it's twofold. Number one, Black people are not monoliths, right? We need to make sure we teach about various different ideas, right? Right about society, right? But the most controversial one is sometimes when we teach Black history, we overcompensate for being excluded. So that means that we teach Black history that is perfect and pristine, right? Let's be clear. Black people have never been perfect, nor Black people have never been pristine, right? So there are some problematic aspects of Black history that we need to explore in our history curriculum, right? And this is not like, oh, see, you did it too type of approach, but it's just humanizing those people, because sometimes when we're too perfect and pristine, what we do is we dehumanize those people, trying to make them perfect and trying to make them pristine, or those events pristine, right? So those are kind of like the principles that I've been teaching communities and schools to kind of approach and examine their Black history through. Developing two more. Principle 7 is going to be like Black excellence and genius, and then Principle 8 is going to be this notion of Black futures, right? And what does that mean when we teach about history? So that would be kind of the advice that I would give community members and Black parents and schools moving forward.
And that's really great advice, because it gives us a blueprint of how we, move forward. I think a lot of people want to improve, what's being taught in the schools when it comes to Black history, but it's oftentimes you look around and it's not completely obvious where you start. And so with you giving those principles there's a starting point, at least, to say we need to include, these 8, I think it was 8 principles you had there. And so that's excellent advice for people, parents, administrators, teachers, whoever may be listening. Use those 8 principles. There's a way to get in there and have Black history taught properly. And so that's gonna do it for this segment. We're gonna take another quick break, and when we come back, we have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here. Stick with us. All right, welcome back. So we're continuing our conversation with Dr. LaGarrett King from the University of Missouri, and he's been excellent all the way throughout this interview, laying it down for us in a way that everybody can understand. And Dr. King, we wanted to get your advice on that other part of your research and your expertise, which is how we teach Black history to society. And so we kind of named this segment "Revamping Society." And so we want to start with, the narrative after the Civil War. We know what the Daughters of the Confederacy did, how successful they were in really changing the narrative and what was taught in schools and our textbooks. And, that campaign was highly successful and really, like you say, miseducating a lot of people when it came to slavery and the narrative around the Civil War. And so this campaign has been able to teach generations of both Black and white students a version of American history that largely leaves us out. And so going forward, we may be successful in teaching the next generation, Gen Z and onward, a proper Black history. But how do we go back and fill in the historical gaps for older Americans who never learned, the full story of African American history?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, like with anything, I think people have to identify their miseducation, right? I mean, it's 2021, right? So there's tons of books. I mean, there's so many books out there that is hard to kind of keep up with. I kind of look at this kind of new era Black history is kind of like a resurgence, right, in terms of Black history education. I kind of connect with the Harlem Renaissance a little bit, because that's my second favorite historical era behind the Haitian Revolution. But if you notice, like right before the Harlem Renaissance, right, we had a pandemic, right? Then we had a lot of racial strife, right? And, then we had this big boom, right? And we had a lot of Black creatives, right? The same thing is happening now, right? Pandemic, racial strife, and this, wonderful aspects of Black creatives. So there's like several different YouTube channels that help us, learn real quick. One I like is Home Team History by this brother who, does videos on ancient Africa. There's another one, Black History in 2 Minutes. I believe Skip Gates is over that. Also, you have all these PBS specials. I know a few days ago he came out with, Black History in the Black Church, right? And then there's Many Rivers to Cross. There's a special on Africa, and such. So there's several different avenues where if you don't want to, grab all the books, that you can kind of read and kind of catch up a little bit, right? I know this brother, Brandon Brown, he has this company he created called Schoolyard Rap, right? And with Schoolyard Rap, I think he created this Black History Network now. So he has several different videos, which are really good that you can, watch. Freddie Taylor from Urban Intellectuals with his Black History flashcards, and I believe he does some web presence as well. So there's like tons of different people. My friend Dr. Khalid Alakim with the Black History Mobile Museum, where he goes around the country and moves his museum around for people to learn about Black history. He's been really big in the community, and there's several different ways that we can catch up on our Black history knowledge now, particularly in 2021. So many Black creatives out there.
No, that's awesome. I think that if the lesson out of that is that there are plenty of resources, and there are plenty of resources that you can tap into your level, your comparability. I love that the Black History in 2 Minutes. That's a really good one. I feel that probably engages with a lot of people because we live in more of a microwave society. Our next question here really talks about I guess some of the initiatives to rectify some of these wrongs we've been talking about. Because one thing that we saw from the past year is that we saw a lot of racial tension. We saw that there was a lot of death and police brutality. We saw, George Floyd, we saw those marches and the protests. But after the rallies and after the presidential election, it seems like the focus just really, really shifted. And there hasn't really been any major legislation, any major pushes to really bring our country together and some true justice out of that matter. And it was interesting because the support that we saw was actually a movement that was multicultural, multi-generational. But our question to you is, what is it, or rather, why does it take, our people going through hell, really to, wake up society and get them to take notice? And, does the inaction from our government and maybe the dwindling support for ideas like Black Lives Matter from our societal members say anything about our fight for liberty?
Yeah. So real quick, if you study kind of the history of Black history education, you'll notice that there's a correlation between whenever there's racial strife in our society, there always been a call for more Black history in the classrooms, right? So we can go from after the Civil War, Black history was very prominent. We can go from the early 20th century, after the Red Summer of 1919 and all the racial strife early, you had Negro History Week, being developed. You can go from the Civil Rights Movement. Most people don't talk about the civil rights in schools, where parents, teachers, students walked out for more Black history in our classrooms. We could talk about Afrocentric education in the late 80s, early 90s. And then, what I would call the Black Lives Matter, movement since 2013, there has been an uptick for more Black history education, right? The problem is, again, it goes back to our history, right? People look at us as slaves. So they don't take our humanity, our words seriously, right? Because I could tell you, like last summer, I was a little confused, right? And I've written this before. It's just like I was extremely sad, right? Mainly because this has been constant throughout our history. And then I felt a little resentment because then I started getting texts and messages from, white colleagues and, hey, are you okay? This jacked up, and you're getting all these particular things. And then on June 19th, you're getting text messages, happy June 19th. And I'm like, I never got no messages. So I was a little confused. I was upset, sad, like, very resentful. I'm like, what's going on here, right? So throughout our history, right, we've always had these moments, right, but they've never been like complete movements, right? In terms of really sitting down, because the problem is not necessarily listening, right? Mm-hmm. Folks have been listening, are sitting down pretending they were listening, but they're not hearing, nor are they doing, right? So I think this generation now, and us that are within this generation have to force the powers that be, right? We have to force them to do, right? Because throughout history, we've told you this for so long. Now it's time to do, right? You see other folk are doing, right? With all these legislations saying that, hey, you shouldn't teach the 1619 project. You shouldn't teach Black history. That is this and that, right? Well, we need to come out and influence our politicians, our people to kind of rebuke those particular, aspects. Now, am I calling for like a national Black history curriculum? Probably not, because again, we have to realize, right, who's going to be writing the curriculum, who's going to do this, who's going to be that, and about time that all that's all the dust settles, it's probably not going to be worth anything, really. Now in the past, we did have the African American history. With a 400-year African American History Act that was passed in 2018 to celebrate 1619, right? But the way in which the law was written, was kind of, funny. But that particular commission, was supposed to give out grants, right, throughout the country for those who wanted to help educate, the country about Black history. Now, I think that should be extended, right, through the Biden administration and through other people's administration. I do think there needs to be a national commission that kind of studies these particular things with, experts, right, people who actually do the work, and not just, historians, but you need teacher educators, you need teachers, you need community members, to kind of help, flow and push this forward. But, really and truly, it's about action now. It's not all about all this talk. I'm sick and tired, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are just sick and tired of talking. It's not like you haven't heard this before. Even when I, give out my principles, they're, oh my God, oh man, those principles are wonderful. I'm like, well, I'm kind of smart, but I mean, really and truly, we've been saying this since the late 1800s. You just have to read history books. You have to read, written by Black educators. You need to read Black history books written by Black historians, and you have to listen to Black teachers. These are things they've been telling you for over a century. Those are their words that I'm just making a little bit more palatable for people in today's time, right? So, I'm sick of talking, right? It's time for action.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's you're really setting the stage for your final message. You don't even know it yet, but that you're really setting the stage up real well, because that's what I think that's what we really are. It's about action, because it's like you said, we've been talking in circles. So we're going to take one more break here, and viewers, when we come back, we're going to get Dr. King's final message. So stick with us, and we'll be right back. Viewers, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Black Agenda style, as always, we love to give our guests the opportunity of delivering kind of like a final message, just to kind of send this episode off to you in a great big old bow. So remember, today we're joined with Dr. LaGarrett King, Associate Professor of Social Studies Education at the University of Missouri. So to kind of, paint the picture for you, Dr. King, We've kind of talked about the fact that racism is really woven into the fabric of America. It's a part of the culture. That's one of the things that we talked about in season one as our first episode. And we know that it's always been an issue. I mean, we even fought a war over it. People may say states' rights, but it really came down to slavery and racism. And when we talk about this experiment of American democracy, we've really seen the demise of our people generation after generation and not being fully valued as a part of the democracy and not being able to fully participate in this democracy. It can probably be noted that some of these issues that we've talked about have been talked, back, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and so on. We've talked about how they just keep churning and almost getting worse. So if you were going to be getting maybe an appointment from President Biden as maybe a top advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Education, and you were tasked with really trying to transform the way education is in America, we just like to just ask you as a final message, what would be your first task, as that special advisor to the administration and your message to the American people?
Man, we need to tear what we know as U.S. history up. Just go ahead and just tear it up, right? It's not about this notion of reform, it's about transformation, right? Because when we first created, right, the history curriculum, we all know. I mean, white folk can say this too, that the history curriculum is Eurocentric. So what does that mean, right? That means that we dehumanize people that are not white, people who are not white males, people who are not rich or middle class. Is that our purpose, right? What is our mission statement as a country in U.S. history, right? U.S. history is not about being patriotic. U.S. history is not about making us feel good, right? If you want a history that's about making you feel good, you just call it nostalgia, right? But if we really want to have a complete history, we need to hold white people historically accountable, which we don't do in our history curriculum. We need to understand that history is psychologically violent. The problem is that psychological violence has been one-sided. And how do we make sure that we, I don't know, for lack of a better word, share that psychological violence, right, throughout the aspect is that we need to humanize everybody, not just humanize the oppressor, right, by saying they were men and women of their times. No, they weren't. They were always abolitionists in those times. So those people made a choice. They were good to their slaves. You can't be good for somebody that you own, right? You can't be good to somebody that you rape, right? And we need to stop humanizing those who are considered the enslavers, the oppressors, and begin to humanize everyone throughout history, whether it's good or whether it's bad. So let's tear up what we know as U.S. history right now, and let's get really serious about doing it. I don't want to hear no talk about no patriotism. I don't want to hear no talk about, oh my gosh, we're being mean to certain people. No, we need to get this history right, and let's get the business right. And I think it's time for that.
Wow. With that first line, tear it up. I mean, we had a conversation with, it's going to come out later, but with the curator for the 1619 project, Mary Elliott, and she talked at length about, having to change the way people think. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we were asking how we could fill in the gaps, because we all got a version of history. And Mary Elliott talked about an instance where she had written something, I think, for a show. And the person who I guess was like the producer or something was like, well, we need to change that. And she was like, why? And she was like, because I didn't learn it like that in school. And so that's the type of forces you're up against when you talk about changing and reorienting and kind of turning the ship of how history is taught. So it's interesting. Yep, go ahead.
But I tell people, we need to stop calling it history and begin to start calling it histories. Right? Because when we call it history, that Y denotes singular, and that singular denotes kind of the default narrative that we have, and it's just psychic, right? It's like, oh, history, default white male, Eurocentric, middle class, heterosexual aspect. Instead of the IES, histories denotes plurality, and it helps us understand that there's multiple perspectives that we should be teaching in history. And that makes sense to a lot of different people.
No, you're absolutely right, and I love your perspectives throughout our entire interview, talking about the whole push to really try to, I guess, push nonviolence over us. When throughout the white history, you like you said, abolitionists, you've seen them riding against the king, taking from the Native Americans. You've always seen them going against the grain, but when it comes to us, we're supposed to just sit down and do sit-ins and shut up and that kind of stuff. So
Get beat up.
yeah,
Yeah, get me.
that's right. So you're awesome, Dr. King. I'm sure you hear that all the time, but we really really appreciate just how you laid this out, because I know we people probably say we talk about racism and stuff like this so often, but this is why we have to figure out different ways to bridge the gap, because racism isn't just a singular thing. It's it's in our institutions, it's in our textbooks, it's in our culture, in our religion. So we just really really love that you gave it a fresh perspective and just really laid it out in a very engaging way. So we really thank you for being with us today.
Gentlemen, keep on doing what you are doing. This is a very important platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King. I echo everything Adrian said, and we appreciate you coming on. And we'll make sure to promote everything. Let us know if you got any big projects coming up that we can definitely help out and amplify your message there. So for the folks who are listening, still with us, this was Dr. LaGarrett King, Associate Professor of Social Sciences, Social Studies Education at the University of Missouri, excuse me. Excellent, amazing interview. And Dr. King, we wish you the best. Of course, always stay healthy, continue wearing the mask and social distance. And take care. We appreciate you coming on.
Till next time.
All right, viewers, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back. All right, welcome back, listeners. So we always like to end the show, of course, with some tidbits about what we're going to be doing upcoming after this interview. So again, we were speaking with Dr. LaGarrett King from the University of Missouri, and he was amazing, as you could see there. And so he had some very good tidbits, very, very good in his research area. And so we wanted to remind you, before we got off the call, Dr. King wanted us to remind you all, everybody that's listening, that Black History Week and month, did not start off as a time to only focus on Black history. It really was a moment, a month or week to start, to show off what you had learned about Black history throughout the entire year. Learning about Black history is a year-long process, not a month-long, event or a week-long event. It is a time for you to show off what you've learned throughout the year. So just keep that in mind when you, talk about Black history to others. Explain to them that we need to be learning about ourselves and other people need to be learning Black history throughout the entire year, not just 28 days in February, that we do celebrate Black History Month. So we just wanted to make sure we get that tidbit out there. And so after Dr. King's interview, our next episode will be a special one. We're going to be featuring the organization called the History Makers. And so we will have the founder and executive director, Dr. Juliana Richardson, on the show. And so that's going to be a very good one to round out our Black History Month episodes. And then for the month of March, we are recognizing HBCU Awareness Month by doing an HBCU Awareness series. And so each week we'll be releasing a conversation with a leader at an HBCU. And if you haven't already, please go back and listen to our conversation with the president of FAMU, Dr. Larry Robinson. You will enjoy that one. Yes, it is very, very good. And so, so again, we have Dr. Juliana Richardson coming up from the History Makers, and then HBCU Awareness Month, we're doing a series. We already have one interview down with Dr. Larry Robinson of FAMU. So of course, Adrian, we got stuff going on Saturdays too. So tell the people where they can watch us.
Yeah, Devin, weekly roundup. That's where Devin and I bring you the late breaking news of the week, just to try to make sure you have an unbiased approach. Obviously, we have our personal opinions, but we like to try to take that out of it and try to make sure that we bring you some news that's not on CNN, Fox, or MSNBC, something that you probably hadn't heard of. So make sure you join us, coming to you March 6th at 7:30 p.m. at Central Standard Time on Facebook. We'll be live and in color. The other, I always like to add that. The other thing is that everything we do, viewers, is not free. I mean, from doing the podcast to doing the video, Facebook ads, all that kind of stuff costs. So we would really, really love your support. All you got to do is go to our website, hit the donate buttons, start by giving $1. That's all we're asking for, $1 a month, because that'll snowball. If you do it, get your friends to do it, and hey, we got 100 people giving us $1 a month, and that goes a long way to really help us spread our mission further, because we're looking to do more than just bring you news, talk to guests. We're looking to partner up with other nonprofits, throw our own events to help out in the community. And speaking of our nonprofits and things, one of the other initiatives that we're looking to do is a charity of the month, where we're going to be doing Facing History and Ourselves for the month of February. So all month we've been kind of talking about them, trying to highlight them. Go to their website, look at some of their initiatives. Really, really great stuff. I mean, they're seeking to educate students of all backgrounds about the history of racism, prejudice, and anti-Semitism. So really, really great stuff to get behind. So yeah, Devin, a lot for people to get behind, and a lot of reasons for people to give.
Yes, absolutely. Look, I mean, this thing here, you'll be hard pressed to find content like what we're producing here at the Black Agenda podcast. Not to toot our own horn, but I feel like, I have not seen the type of people we've had on this show, experts, people like Dr. LaGarrett King. I mean, how many places do you see trying to interview him? And so we were lucky to nab him. And so, yes, we also, before we go, we'd like to tell you to like, share, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can follow us at Black Agenda Pod, and that's at Black Agenda Pod. And you can go there. Make sure you follow us, like us, and our website, our new website here is blackagendapod.com. So you can go there. You can listen to all of our episodes from season 1 and 2. You can also find our weekly roundups. You can also donate to us. Just like Adrian was telling you, we do need a few dollars to keep this thing going. And so we like for you to go there. So that's blackagendapod.com is where you can go to our website, and to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Black Agenda Pod. Share that with everybody, friends, family, coworkers, anyone else you may know, share it with them. So for us here at the Black Agenda, that's it for us. We appreciate you listening. Adrian, any last thoughts before we go?
Nope. Other than make sure you stick with us for the month of March, because it's going to be a great month for us. A lot of great content, so be on the lookout for that.
Absolutely. That's a big one. So until next time, we'll catch you later. Thanks for watching.